Is Brandon on? Hello? And John? Thank you. It's still morning. We've had a dynamic discussion this morning. Don't know if you had time to listen to a part of it, but I so welcome you. I am so very humble to introduce you to the panel, Association of Justice and Treatment Professional Conference today. And we have 90 minutes in which I will first say a bit about your background for those of whom I have your bio. And then Peter, I'm going to look to get a bit more detail. But welcome. You've had a good morning. Please unmute yourself if you're muted.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Fantastic.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Chief Brendan Cox. Where are you, Brendan?
Good morning, Norma. How are you? Very nice to see you.
I'm very well. Chief Brendan Cox, just think he's retired. He's the Director of Policing Strategies at the Lead National Support Bureau, where he brings 23 years of experience in law enforcement and criminal justice reform. He retired as a chief of police from Albany, New York Police Department in January 2017. He was employed with the department for over 23 years, serving in many capacities throughout his career. And then today we're focusing on family and the complexity. So I am so happy to read that you promoted from Detective Sergeant in Children and Family Services and moved on to higher and higher promotions, serving your community. Sir, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hello, John.
Actually, Norma, John is just having some difficulty getting on.
So I'll talk with Peter.
Okay, I'm working on it behind the scenes.
So Peter is in a nice warm country, aren't you?
I am. I'm in Jamaica, Montego Bay. It's beautiful here.
Thank you for joining us today. And I'm so sorry I did not ask you to forward your bio. But from speaking with you, I know that you're a staff superintendent in the Toronto Police Services. So can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Peter Moreira. So I'm in charge right now. We split the city up into east and west of Yonge Street, being the main dividing line in Toronto, which is the fourth largest city in North America. I'm responsible for everything east of Yonge Street, and my colleagues responsible for everything west of Yonge Street. There's 7 staff superintendents, and essentially we're the last layer of operational decision-making within the Toronto Police Service. We have 2 deputies and a chief of police that are above us, and so they're at the executive level, and the 7 of us are responsible for administrating all the different services, policing services that we deliver. We're also tasked with partnerships, many external partnerships, which is one of the things that I heard you talk lots about in the last session there. We're always looking and leading different initiatives with many city partners. Certainly, this is a new concept for us. Relatively new, although we've always valued partnerships. I think moving forward, we're going to rely even more heavily upon partnerships. Is the only way that we're going to be able to deliver effective public safety. So my career, I'm in my 31st year. I have had the privilege of working in a variety of different capacities, from frontline police work to working the homicide squad at every single rank, and even had the pleasure of going back there as the unit commander for a period of time before I went over and moved over to our gun and gang task force. And I led that for almost 2 years. And so I began to see really the value of partnerships. We were embedded with our Ministry of the Attorney General in the same building, and we worked on a number of different initiatives to combat gun violence throughout the city. And it is really where I began to marry the partnerships and the grassroots service delivery of many different agencies and the enforcement side of policing as well. Beyond that, I can't seem to keep a job. Every couple of years, I move on to something new, and I love the new challenges, and I keep challenging myself, and I think growing and find new ways and new reasons to come to work every day. I'm not as lucky as Chief Cox. Perhaps in a year and a half, I'll be able to retire, but not just yet for me.
Well, thank you for that overview. So while we're waiting on our third panelist, I'll just review very briefly where our conversation should take us today. Community safety and well-being cannot rest solely on the shoulders of the police. It is a shared responsibility of all members of our community and requires an integrated approach to bring municipalities together. We have First Nations and we have community partners that will be coming up later to address these issues as a collective goal. Breaking down existing silos and encouraging multi-sectoral partnerships are essential in developing strategies, programs, and services to help minimize risk factors and to improve the overall well-being of our communities. So, Peter, since you are talking about yourself, maybe I'll have you take a minute, or not a minute, a few minutes, because I welcome Chief Brandon Cox to share with us what are the interesting changes, collaboration. What are some things that you see happening that will bring our society together in a better way?
Sorry, Norma, you want me to start?
No, Chief Brandon.
Cox.
Yeah, the chief.
Yeah. Okay, Chief, go ahead.
Sure, and please, I'm Brendan. I didn't like to be called chief when I was chief.
Hello, Brandon.
Please. So, you know, I think that, and to attest to a lot of things Peter was talking about in his career, you know, I think police have been tasked to do a lot of things, and police have been asked to kind of be the guardians of public safety and respond to an awful lot of societal issues that the police aren't necessarily the right formula to address those issues. And I think that, you know, police being the responders that are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it's sometimes the easy thing to do. That, you know, hey, the police are there, let them respond to it and let them figure out the way to deal with it. And I think in reality, that's the easy way out, and it's also the wrong way out. You know, when we talk about the issues around trauma, the issues around unmet behavioral health needs, we need those collaborations that Peter was talking about. We need partnerships. We need the right solutions at the right time, and we need to make sure that the police can take a step back and say, you know, this isn't our, we're not the right solution here. This isn't our expertise. Let's bring the experts in and let's have the experts address this. And when folks do need us, that's fine. Let's go ahead and have us now come step in. Public safety is broader than the criminal legal system. There are alternative things we can do. There's public health response. There is, you know, we look at things like substance use disorders and mental health issues, and we look at our homeless issues that are going on internationally. Those aren't things that we're going to ultimately solve through punishment and coercion. Those are things we need. We need social workers out on the street meeting people. It doesn't take a police officer or a police response to realize there's an issue when somebody's living on a tent. You know, I still live in Albany. Albany's weather is not much different than Toronto's weather. It does not take somebody to have a police response to realize that somebody living in downtown Toronto or downtown Albany in a tent in January to realize that there's probably some kind of issue going on. And it's probably not an issue that the criminal legal system needs to respond to. It's probably an issue that we need some kind of social worker to figure out what's going on with this person. Is it an economic issue? Is it a mental health issue? Is it a substance use issue? Is it all three of those issues? And how do we expect, I was 23 years old when I became a cop. Do we expect some 23-year-old cop to be able to address that all by themselves? Or do we need more services? Do we need housing? Do we need to understand that, having somebody arrested and having somebody say, hey, you need to stop using drugs. And if you don't stop using drugs, we're not giving you access to housing. We're not giving you access to services, that those are the wrong approaches. So we need collaboration. We need to be able to sit down and figure things out. And we need other people that are actually out on the street addressing issues rather than relying on a 911 system approach, which is often leading to handcuffs and leading to just further trauma, further stigmatization, further isolation for that individual that we ultimately want help for. We don't want to cause further damage to.
Norma, I think you're on mute, Norma.
And Norma, you'll see that John has joined us. He's under my name. We had to do some
Welcome, John.
rounds, but John's here, so I'll let John introduce himself as well, or Norma, you can introduce him.
John, did you want to just tell us about yourself, being the manager of community safety and well-being at the Region of Peel Police Services?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And apologies for the technical difficulties. I see I'm under Mary's name. So if there's anything I say you don't like, we'll just say Mary said it and we'll move on. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. As you mentioned, Norma, I'm the manager of community safety and wellbeing services at Peel Regional Police. And that's a position that was created just about a year and a half ago. So before I was here with Peel Regional Police, I worked about a little over 15 years in human services in the municipal sector. And a lot of what I did was working with partners to respond to complex social issues, which is really what we're trying to do here through community safety and wellbeing at Peel Police. But thank you for the introduction. I had a chance to hear a little bit about what Brendan and Peter were saying as I was getting set up, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. So Brendan, thank you for that. We're going to be lining up more questions for you. How about Peter? Please share with us why do we don't want to rely completely on safety and well-being of our police to protect our community? What do you see happening, and how can you and your services shape different approaches, make a positive impact?
So I guess the best way to begin to answer that question would be to acknowledge that public safety is a component of well-being. So a healthy community is a safe community. And so we see this through, what I call the trifecta: homelessness, mental health, and addiction. Those three really serious, complex issues often can be found in the people who are most vulnerable in our systems and the people that we encounter. One of the greatest privileges of my life was going back to the division that I started at as the unit commander. And what I found is that nothing had changed in all those years that I had been gone doing other things. The problems just got more desperate. It is in the downtown center of Toronto, and homelessness, mental health, and addiction are often untreated there. What's actually happening under the guise of harm reduction is actually really, really troubling, and I would say bordering on inhumane. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but that's one of the things that we need to do as committed partners, is to have honest conversations from our own perspectives and do a lot of listening. And certainly that's what I've done. The Police Services Act is changing, and changed in 2019. The whole act hasn't really come into being. There's certain aspects of it, but the Community Safety and Policing Plan of 2019 will come into force at some point in the next year or so. I suspect that one of those components is that every municipality is required to have a community safety and well-being plan. And so in the city of Toronto, we have SafeTO run by Scott McKean, who I'm sure John knows very well. And he is spearheading it. He's not a police officer. But he brings together all the social services and many of the NGOs together, community health partners, and a number of different groups that have been brought together. And the whole goal here is that under this SafeTO and this community safety well-being plan, there are over 60 different unique strategies, everything from food insecurity strategies to parks revitalization to after school programs. So there's all of these things that we're running independently, and some are new creations that are now under one umbrella, and there's a better coordination in the delivery of these services, or at least we're trying. And one of the aspects in there is policing, for sure. And what we're looking to do now is to address upstream. We're really looking for upstream resources. And so this is where our conversations have now moved to. The downtown core is flush with resources in terms of community groups, but there's very little coordination between many of these community groups. And we're hoping that with the community safety and well-being plan, the SafeTO plan, that we're going to have better coordination so that there's a better distribution of when services and the types of services that are offered to the people who need it the most. Even when we make arrests and putting people in handcuffs is a necessary act from time to time. It truly is. It protects people, including the person who we're handcuffing and bringing back to the station. But, it's not over at that point. There isn't only one way to deal with that person now. And so what we're seeing is we have embedded crisis workers that work right in many of our police stations today, and they begin the process of trying to get that person out of the legal system. We have an embedded crime attorney, for instance, in 51 Division that looks and tries to stream people into mental health courts, drug treatment courts, domestic violence courts, other courts that can give that person another opportunity, another chance to get themselves out of the criminal justice system and really to address those unmet core needs. One of the other areas that we're really focusing on is and I think Brendan talked about it there, 23-year-old kid coming out of the police college, we really tasked to solve these problems. But, what we're finding is that the people that we're hiring today are much more in tune with this way of thinking. They want resources. They want to know the whys of things. And so we're providing many more of those answers to the whys. Why do we look for alternatives? Why are our partnerships so valued? And one of those things that we mandate every frontline police officer to take is an adverse childhood trauma course. It's online, and everybody gets a certificate at the end of it if you pass. And it really exposes officers to those little cumulative impacts of things going on in particularly young people's lives and how they can manifest themselves. So at every single opportunity every interaction, we have an opportunity there to point them in another direction, to get them some help that they need, to make that connection to another service provider. And so, we spent a great deal of time making sure that our officers have this information, and more importantly, that they understand what resources and partners are actually available to them in the communities that they're actually in. And in the case of Toronto, a multicultural city, many of those things are very specific and delivered to particular groups that may feel marginalized in another larger sense. And, everything from, Indigenous specific resources to the LGBT2+ community, and everything in between. So it's very specific and tailored to each group that we deal with.
Thank you.
Norma, I wonder if I can just interject for a second. I know
Yes.
that both John and I believe Brendan, you have slides that you were going to share with the group. Am I right about that? I know, John, yes, you do. Brendan, am I right about that?
Yes, but I can certainly adapt any way we want to move forward. It's fine with me.
No, that's okay. We'll make sure we have time to do both of those. So I just wanted to jump in and make sure we were on track for that.
So Mary, do you have the slides prepared then for Brendan?
So I have John's slides. I don't think I have Brendan's, but both of you have the capability of sharing your screens. So whoever wants to go first to start to go through those slides, I can get John's slides open, or Brendan, you can jump in first. Doesn't matter to us.
Okay, open John's, please. I didn't save any. I sent them all to you.
Mary, I can save you the clicking if you'd like, and I can share my screen here.
Sure, thanks.
Right.
So John, please go ahead and share with us. Thank you so very much, Peter. We'll be coming back with some questions. Go ahead, John.
Bear with me just a moment here. Okay, so I will back it up. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here to share a little bit about what we're doing here at Peel Regional Police around community safety and well-being. And I don't want to give you the impression that we think we've got it all figured out. We're very much building the airplane while we're flying it here. So what I'm sharing is very much our early days and our early reflections on this approach to policing. So I just want to start with the premise here that will be familiar to many on the call, and I think a couple of our other panelists alluded to this earlier, that much of what we're doing to ensure public safety has less to do to responding to traditional incidents of crime and more to do with complex social issues. And I love the trifecta: mental health, addiction, homelessness, because that's certainly all prominent issues that our officers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So when we bring new recruits in, and being respectful of the fact that people enter policing after having gone in many other careers, one of the staff sergeants in our training always starts with, as a show of hands, who's joining us as a doctor, who's been a nurse in the background, maybe a social worker, a mental health clinician, a marriage counselor. And usually there's the odd time you'll get a hand up, but usually there's a pretty awkward silence there. And then we kind of break the ice by saying, at the end of the day, you might be one of these in all of the shifts, and in one shift alone that you're responding to. And it's certainly not our goal to transition our police officers into social workers, but at the very least, we need to be able to have the, what I call the 3 Ps, the partnerships, the perspective, and the the partnerships, the perspectives, and the pathways to be able to connect these individuals to supports and resources that are better positioned to meet their needs. And before I jump into a little bit about what we're doing, just a little bit about Ontario's community safety and well-being context. So through changes to the Police Services Act, as Peter alluded to, there is a mandate now for all municipalities in Ontario to have community safety and well-being plans. And our experience here in Peel, our plan, much like SafeTO, was launched a little while back. And it's been a really valuable tool for bringing together partners on issues that require a collaborative or multi-sector approach to set that common agenda and that shared approach. And in many respects, a mandate to legislate collaborative behavior amongst partners is unprecedented, but I think it was wise because it's really played a role across the province in breaking down those silos and having a more coordinated and integrated approach between police and a wide range of community partners. And this model here may be familiar to many who are participating on this conference. It's Ontario's community safety and well-being planning framework. So at the root of those plans, the province has asked us to leverage this framework to shape how we work together to deliver services. And I won't jump into this in any great depth, but on the outside, we have social development. So that's the recognition that for people to stay well, to be healthy, and to live stable, productive lives, they need the supports, the resources, and really the social determinants of health to live safe, healthy, and productive lives. Here in the blue zone is all about prevention, and that's really about looking at issues or risk factors that require a collaborative, planful approach. So, for instance, in the prevention zone, we know that that opioid use is an issue that is impacting communities right across this province, right across this country. So what can we do together as systems to work further upstream to put in place the supports and resources so we have less harm in our communities? Risk intervention in the yellow. So if we have individuals in our community where we know they're in a crisis situation and that's going to boil over without some form of intervention, what are we doing to put those supports in place so those individuals don't end up coming downstream to police, our emergency departments, or other systems of what I would call systems of last resort in terms of an incident response. And as police services, we're often in this red, and the goal of this framework is that we work further upstream to have fewer situations coming into this area. But the reality is we're always going to be responding those. So it's incumbent upon us as police services to make sure that we're positioned for the realities in front of us and that we're applying our resources most effectively to those issues. So for us as a service, we've really gone beyond this mandate. So we are very active participants in the Peel Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. It's co-chaired by our chief, but we're taking this thinking, this philosophy a step further by really operationalizing these concepts and principles of community safety and wellbeing right throughout the service. So what does that mean for us? One is identifying root causes. And officers will often know the calls that they get. They might be seeing the same individual 10, 20 times over the course of a month or a year. So what are the root issues driving those calls? And how do we better connect and streamline those individuals to the supports and resources through service connections and off-ramps? Going even a step further, and I think, Peter, you alluded to this, how do we get those professionals right at the front of the call so they have immediate access to those experts who are best positioned to deal with the concern that resulted in that call to police? Mm-hmm. And a big part of this is also about going beyond that lens of enforcement, looking further upstream and establishing a service delivery model that's more inherently proactive and less reactive. And all of this necessarily implies what our chief often talks about, Chief Nishan Duryappa, a non-proprietary approach to policing. We know that police don't have the answers when we go to a call. We know that our community partners are often working with the same individuals that we're seeing, but at different ends of the continuum. And how do we come together in a more coordinated and integrated way? And to me, there's really three imperatives for doing this: the societal, the fiscal, and the human. So from the societal perspective, we know that demands upon police are changing. We know that the types of calls our officers are responding to, again, are increasingly less about crime and more to do with complex social issues. So again, positioning our resources to make sure we're responding effectively. There's also a clear fiscal dimension to this, and I don't think anyone on this call would disagree that it's more cost-effective to serve someone further upstream, to reduce the number of times that police are being asked to go to an address or an individual, and we know that's more cost-effective for everyone concerned. And Peter mentioned mental health crisis workers, and many communities in Ontario and police services will have mobile crisis response teams. And we know that when those teams respond to a call, there's significantly less time spent with that individual. There's a much greater likelihood that those individuals will be apprehended and brought to hospital. So not only results in better outcomes for those individuals, but is also a cost savings to our system. And then, of course, there's the clear human dimension. And, Brendan and Peter mentioned that sometimes arrest is the necessary answer. We know that people can do better if we can provide them the supports we need, keep them out of the back of a police car, and put them on a pathway to a better quality of life. So for me, this is really the trifecta of why we need to go this way. So again, I'm going to take this from the theory to more of the practice and talk a bit about how we've taken this concept and have operationalized it and are still operationalizing it right throughout our service. So back in June 2022, as a companion to the Peel Regional CSWB strategy, we launched our own internal CSWB plan, really as a framework to how we apply these concepts and principles throughout our service. And we're certainly not starting from scratch. We've had a number of examples that I'll point to in a minute that have been in play for quite some time now, but really building on those initiatives, how do we apply that thinking right throughout our service? And the one thing I'll highlight is that this isn't intended to be a document that sits on the shelf. It really is a living, breathing approach to how we change the philosophy and the culture of how we serve our communities. I won't go into each of these areas, but earlier we talked about the community safety and well-being framework. And what we've done with this strategy is outline some guiding principles, some desired outcomes, and key actions, initial key actions in each area of the framework to guide how we apply these practices and principles throughout our service. So if we look at the red area, for example, around incident response, this is all about how do we identify those root causes, whether it's in our communications, whether it's on a frontline call to service, so that we can connect people to the supports they need. It's about equipping our members with tools, knowledge, and resources so they have the ability and the opportunity to understand what's available in the system to make those connections. And it's also about how do we get our partners more integrated right within our service delivery model. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And these success factors here that the plan is built upon, these are provincially recognized success factors in the CSWB planning ecosystem. Three that I'll highlight here are embracing solutions that are data-driven and evidence-based. We all have scarce resources, and this is about how do we apply those resources most effectively where they're needed the most in a way that's evidence-based. In Peel, we have one of the most diverse communities anywhere in Canada. And incumbent upon us and all communities is how do we deliver services in a way that is culturally responsive, equitable, and inclusive. And a big part of how we're doing that is through our human rights project. So about a year ago, Peel Regional Police entered into a memorandum of understanding with our Ontario Human Rights Commission to ensure that we're putting human rights at the center of everything we do as a service. And we've already talked about strengthening safety and well-being through partnerships. So how do we take that non-proprietary approach and apply it throughout our service? So our first step in doing this was embarking on what I would call a significant organizational realignment to ensure that we're positioned to have an impact on the types of issues that I've just been talking about. So I would say one of the cornerstones of this was the formation of a Community Safety and Wellbeing Services Bureau, which consolidates a number of our proactive supports into one bureau, including our mobilization activities, our mental health approaches, and our road safety programming as well. And we're also often asked about road safety in terms of, well, how does that apply from a CSWB perspective? So if we think about going further upstream in prevention, as part of this reorganization, we created a team that proactively engages with individuals who are known to have unsafe driving practices to prevent those fatal life-altering collisions that really have an impact in our community. We also know that things like driving under the influence are inherently an addiction issue. And we've worked very closely with Mary and her team at Peel Addiction Assessment and Referral Center, so that now anytime anyone is pulled over and charged with impaired, they automatically get a referral to Park to get the help they need. One of the real cornerstones of this reorganization and this Community Safety and Wellbeing Bureau is our Divisional Mobilization Unit. So this is a team of 48 officers that has a mandate to supportively engage with priority populations. And when I say priority populations, what I'm really getting at is those individuals who could be better served outside of a traditional response. And our DMU unit engages with priority populations in a number of ways, but one of them is following up on calls for service. So if we have an officer who attends a call and it's a fundamentally non-criminal issue, and it's really just someone who's in need of help, they will make a referral. Our Divisional Mobilization Unit will follow up, try to get a better understanding of what's going on and make that connection to the service that's most appropriate to their needs. And what we're really trying to do here is get away from that idea of, well, here's a business card, make that call. Oftentimes individuals need that system navigation to actually get plugged into a service. And that's a lot of what our Divisional Mobilization Unit does. And I've just included a bit of research we've done on this approach. So we looked at a sample of 130 DMU clients that came on to our program earlier this year. And compared to 3 months before and 3 months after, we saw a 50% decrease in occurrences among those individuals. So again, not only is this helping individuals have a better quality of life, that's also allowing us to more effectively utilize our resources. I won't spend much time on this, but I just wanted to point out that the Divisional Mobilization Unit is part of what I would call a broader mobilization ecosystem at Peel Regional Police. So when an officer goes to a call and it's been identified that this is really something that could be better served by our partners, they make a referral into our Community Safety and Wellbeing Services Bureau, and we'll triage it to the support or resource that's most appropriate. So we have our divisional mobilization unit that I just mentioned, but we also have a smaller team called Regional Community Mobilization that really is there to deal with the more complex cases that require multiple service providers, that require those wraparound supports, as well as our Crisis Outreach Support team, which is more geared towards mental health. And so we'll triage it to the most appropriate resource. And if there's still a level of acuity that requires even greater intervention or support, our community mobilization team is directly connected to our situation table. And I know many on this call will know what a situation table is, but for those who aren't familiar, it's essentially a group of organizations that comes together on a weekly basis to provide wraparound supports to individuals or situations that are deemed to be acutely elevated risk. And in Peel, we co-chair the table along with one of our mental health partners, Canadian Mental Health Association. And already this year, we've had 105 of these situations of elevated risk brought forward to the table to put in place those wraparound supports. A big part of this as well is, even beyond following up and connecting people's supports after the fact, how do we get the right resource in place from the beginning? And I'll just give a brief example here of what I would call our mental health continuum. So in addition to our frontline officers responding to calls, we now actually have a community crisis worker embedded right within our call center. So if someone calls in and it's not the type of issue that's likely to require police or an immediate response, they can now triage that call to a more appropriate service provider. And this is in tandem with our clinician rapid response team, which is a partnership between Peel Police, Canadian Mental Health Association, Punjabi Community Health Services, and Roots Community Services to provide a culturally responsive response when there are those mental health calls that don't require police. So this is a team of crisis workers without a police officer that's directly deployed to some of those lower acuity mental health calls. And then on the other end of the continuum, for those more higher level of acuity calls, we have our mobile crisis rapid response team, which pairs an officer and a crisis worker to go out together to respond to that call. So we're really trying to match the needs of the individual to the appropriate response.
Wow.
Another way that we're addressing the trifecta of issues that was referred to earlier, particularly with addictions, is through a pilot that we've recently launched in coordination with Mary and her team at Park and as well as Punjabi Community Health Services to connect individuals who come into the custody unit at our 21 division to addiction supports. And this was brought into place after it was identified a trend of what I would call non-serious criminal acts that are the result of individuals who are committing these crimes to feed an addiction issue. So it was identified that while these individuals are in custody, let's have a conversation with them about those underlying needs and provide a direct referral pathway to our addiction support programs. So now anytime someone's brought into custody in 21 division, they have the opportunity for an immediate referral, and our partners, who are absolutely phenomenal, are providing a 24-hour turnaround time to be able to reach out and connect with that individual. And that was just launched in November 2022, and we're very hopeful that we'll see some positive results from that. And just another final example of how we're not just co-responding, but also integrating with our partners. And you heard from Sharon Main Devine earlier, who's the CEO of Catholic Family Services here in Peel. And they're the lead of an organization called the Safe Center of Peel. And what the Safe Center does, it's essentially a one-stop for survivors of intimate partner violence. And at Peel Regional Police, we're ecstatic to be an on-site partner of the Safe Center. And that happened just in spring of 2021. So what that means is that our intimate partner violence unit, which is about 50 officers strong, is co-located right with the Safe Center. So if we have someone who comes to police for an incident of intimate partner violence, we can now walk those individuals across the hall and connect them with all the service providers under one roof who are best positioned to meet their needs. And conversely, if someone comes to the Safe Center, they also have the opportunity to come across the hall to talk to police in a supportive capacity. So again, it's really integrating more effectively so that person doesn't have to tell their story over and over and has access to everything they need under one roof. And in January of this year, we'll be taking that model one step further by pairing an individual from the Safe Center with one of our divisional mobilization officers to actually respond to calls, to domestic calls that are likely to be non-criminal and non-violent, to get in there earlier, put those supports in place, and prevent those issues from escalating to a more serious occurrence in the future. So we're incredibly excited about kicking that off in the new year. So as far as our community safety and well-being trajectory at Peel Regional Police, I'd like to look at it in 3 phases. One was aligning ourselves for impact. So the reorganization that I talked about that resulted in our Community Safety and Wellbeing Services Bureau, as well as our Intimate Partner Violence Unit. The second is some of the targeted programs and initiatives that I've highlighted here, and we'll continue to put in place a number of approaches to get further upstream and support our priority populations. And the third area of operationalizing community safety and well-being is where we're at now, which is how do we fully integrate this philosophy and this thinking throughout our service, right from the front line to our civilians and across the board. And our safety and well-being strategy is really our jumping off point for how we do that. So I won't go into all of these, but a couple that I'll highlight. The first is equipping our officers with tools and resources. So one of the projects we're going to be embarking on in 2023 is a community safety and well-being app that will allow our frontline officers right from their smartphone or from their cruiser to be able to refer directly to community safety and well-being services, but also looking at how we can use that app to create a digital referral pathway to our partners. So it's not just handing that card and saying, hey, give this number a call. It's creating that warm transfer and that direct referral process. We're also going to be applying a community safety and well-being perspective throughout all of our directives and policies throughout the organizations. So it's really embedded, this way of thinking is embedded across the board. And we just did that the other day by now creating within our operational plans, we now have a community safety and well-being drop-down options to ensure that our bureau was plugged in to operational plans for some of those underlying issues that we might not have seen before. The last one that I'll highlight here is continuing to integrate and advocate with our partners. So more and more trying to take the same approach we're taking with the Safe Center, but in other domains and with other community partners. But also we know that the more effective we do our job in terms of off-ramping individuals and making those connections to other services, we know that creates pressure on our partners as well. And we're mindful of that. And as a service, we're committed to advocating with our partners and on behalf of our partners for the resources that they need to come alongside us, because we know we need a coordinated approach right from how we work together around resourcing to how we respond in terms of our service delivery model. So I will leave it off there, but if there are any questions, always happy to have a conversation outside of this forum or during the Q&A period as well.
Thank you, John. And one of the things I had forgotten to mention to our audience is we have a Q&A button, and please put your questions in. We will be glad to answer them. And as John says, if not in this forum, we can connect and answer your questions. You may not want to ask them in the public realm, but please either verbally or you can put in the Q&A. John, you have covered so much of what our Peel Police Services are doing. I am so excited to be on this panel today, moderating it, because my head just went that way. But it is so exciting. So I'm going to come back with some questions for you, but I'll just go to Brendan because he has some slides also that I think Mary's setting up. And then all 3 of you wonderful experts, there'll be questions for you just to share some more. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Nora. And I'm hoping everybody can see that.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So LEAD is very much law enforcement assisted diversion and let everyone advance with dignity is set up in recognition that unmanaged behavioral illness, poverty, and homelessness is very much a reality, and the criminal legal system is not really set up to address those issues, especially through punishment and coercion. And that the justice system, certainly speak of the United States, disparities amongst race and class are pretty pervasive. And that a lot of the evidence that we have, and certainly the US, we lead the way when it comes to incarcerating people. We lead the way when it comes to arresting folks. It's proven to be really ineffective. And if we just look at one simple case of when we look at substance use, between 1980 and 1997, we increased the use of incarceration for nonviolent drug use by 700%. We went from about 40,000 people that were incarcerated to 400,000 people. And that number has stayed the same. It's about 390,000 people. It went down by about 10,000 based on the pandemic. And when we look at drug use in this country, drug use went up. So if jail and incarceration is supposed to deter folks from committing crimes, if it's supposed to rehabilitate people from criminal behavior, we know that that's failed. So the war on drugs in the US, the war on drugs across the world has really failed. So if we know that coercion punishment has not worked, and we know racial disparities have continued to climb, we know that we need to deal with things in a different way. And LEAD ultimately was set up to do that, because what we saw in the early 2000s, specifically in Seattle, was that while those stark racial disparities were happening, people in the criminal legal system also recognized that things were not working. So in Seattle, in the Belltown neighborhood, folks were getting arrested over and over again. Police were not seeing a change. Police were seeing those same folks being arrested time and time again, coming in and out of the system. Prosecutors were seeing the same folks. Folks in the community and civil rights were seeing the fact that a city of about 8% folks of color, 65% folks of color were the folks being arrested. Some civil litigation was happening, and people wound up at a table. So to John's point about collaboration and about partners being together, folks were actually adversaries. But at the time, the adversaries realized that the status quo was not appropriate and that the status quo was not working. Not only were these stark racial disparities, but the system wasn't working. The system of arresting people, trying to incarcerate them, was not changing behavior. It was not making them better, and it was driving large racial disparities. So folks said, well, if jail and prosecution is not working, what if we could make that the last resort? What if that was not the primary strategy? What if we could come up with an alternative strategy where, for a police officer who had somebody that allegedly committed a crime, could actually do something different? Because at the time, and we could certainly look in a lot of places, and I could certainly say in Albany, when I look at the history of what we were doing, police had basically this only answer could be, I can arrest you or I could not arrest you. And certainly there were police officers that didn't arrest everybody, that would say like, hey, this person clearly doesn't need to be arrested. But they really didn't have a tool to address the issue of substance use disorders, mental illness, poverty. They could just let the person go and say, I'm going to give you a break. And certainly officers across the world do that at times. But giving that person a break still wasn't getting them help, still wasn't addressing that person's individual needs. And it also wasn't addressing public disorder, because at the end of the day, there still was public disorder happening, and still the community was looking for some kind of response. And just because the criminal legal system response wasn't the right response, there still needed to be some kind of response. What was that going to be? So folks said, hey, how about we make that arrest be the last response and give officers a tool to do something different? And that's ultimately what they did. And what we've seen is that we've seen since 2011 in Seattle, we've seen this grow now to being in about 100 jurisdictions across the United States, and some international interest, which hopefully will take off. I know this says 2022, but since it's almost the end of 2022, at some point in 2023. But ultimately what LEAD winds up doing is it provides a couple of different avenues. It's a harm reduction, person-centered approach, but it gives an officer the opportunity, the way that LEAD first started out, and we'll talk about how LEAD has changed and progressed over the years, but to give an officer that opportunity to have somebody who has allegedly committed a crime driven by addiction, mental illness, poverty, or homelessness, to be able to say, hey, instead of me arresting you tonight for the 20th, 30th, 40th time, to instead call a case manager and have a case manager respond to the scene and do a warm handoff and say, hey, here's a case manager, here's this person, Brendan. I've known this person for a long time. We've had a lot of dealings with him. clearly the criminal legal system approach is not the right approach. Let me go ahead and do a handoff, a warm handoff, and hand you to the case manager. I'm going to take a step back, and we're going to let you go ahead and start building a relationship with this individual and figure out what's going on and see if we can come to a better way of approaching this issue and to figure out what's going on at the root cause. And it's ultimately really based on a harm reduction approach. And it's recognizing that not everybody's ready, willing, or able to make big changes. And if we think about how we all change at our own pace, and we're all ready to do certain things. And many initiatives up until LEAD started in the United States all required you to be abstinent. And if you weren't abstinent, you weren't going to be allowed to get any kind of services, and you were just going to go to jail. And what LEAD recognized at the time, and we recognize across the country, is that when we say to somebody, you're either going to be abstinent or you're going to go to jail, we lose opportunities to get change. We lose opportunities to do a whole lot of other things. Mm-hmm. So with LEAD and harm reduction, it's about meeting that person where they're at, but not leaving them there. So LEAD figuratively and literally meets that person where they are. So if a person is still using drugs and living on the street, we're going to have a case manager start working with them where they are and start identifying what they're ready to do, and working with them in a street-based mode of recognizing that we're going to go meet them where they're staying. We're going to start figuring out what they're ready to do and build a relationship and trust. Because one of the other things that we've learned over the years, and there's plenty of research to back this up, is that the substance itself might only be scratching at the surface if that's all we're addressing. Because many folks that we're dealing with, especially long-term substance users, are actually using because they have an underlying mental health issue that's never been diagnosed, or they've never even recognized they had that issue. They've never been to a doctor. They've never seen anybody about that. They have underlying trauma. You know, Norma, you brought up, you know, we're talking about families. We're talking about how we get families better resources. You brought up my history in my juvenile unit in the Albany Police. You know, we know about adverse childhood experiences. We know about trauma. We know about the fact that a great many people have trauma in their life and never get that trauma addressed. And what we know about a lot of our participants is that that trauma many times drives substance use. And when it drives substance use and we don't address that trauma, we're only going to scratch at the surface. And what we've seen, and we certainly look at the amount of people in the United States, we lost 107,000 people to drug overdose last year. And I'm sure that number's greater than what that it really is. I'm sure we missed a whole bunch of numbers of what it really is, how many people actually died of drug overdoses last year. And that's unacceptable. But we also know that when we just send people in and out of drug treatment and they continue to relapse, that's because, you know, sending somebody in for 30 days or 60 days and forcing that when they're not ready, many times is because we're not addressing the underlying issue. We're not getting to the fact that somebody has trauma, somebody has unmet mental health issues. And if we don't build a relationship with that person, we don't take that stigma out of things, if we don't give the person a chance to build a relationship with somebody who's going to get to that point and unravel that ball of yarn, we're never going to be able to actually get to the root cause. So in LEAD, we take this harm reduction approach because that case manager that's coming to do that warm handoff, we're going to build that relationship with that person to really figure out what it is that person needs. So we're going to take this very much person-centered approach to really figure out what that person's ready to do and stick with that person for long term. So LEAD is really taking that approach. So LEAD is going to, as LEAD has evolved, LEAD started out as this arrest diversion. It was very much focused on racial disparities in arrests. But as LEAD grew and as we started to listen to our partners, LEAD recognized that there needed to be more ways to get in the door. Because police officers were recognizing that, hey, we know the individuals that need the help of LEAD. We know the individuals that need this new approach. And we don't want to wait until we arrest people to offer them this help. Because if I've already arrested somebody 10 times and I see them every day and there's public disorder happening and the store owner's complaining to me about this individual that's on the block creating a problem, why aren't I problem solving? That's the tool that I'm supposed to have, is to be able to solve problems. Why can't I get this person a case manager from LEAD now? Why do I have to wait till they shoplift before I do that. And now I need to talk to the shop owner about the fact that they had something stolen from the store, and I want to get this person into lead. So what was created after an arrest diversion is what we call a social contact referral. And a social contact referral is what I like to look at as like a community policing end of arrest diversions. This proactive way of getting folks into lead, of being able to say, I don't have to wait until somebody commits a crime to get someone into lead. If I know somebody that's got those same criminogenic needs, and that's somebody that's clearly involved in the system, rather than waiting until they commit a new crime, I can just say, hey, Brendan, I've dealt with you a bunch of times. You've clearly got a bunch of issues going on that our system can't fix, our system shouldn't even be dealing with. We've got this initiative called LEAD. I can get you a case manager that can start helping you out with whatever it is you want to get help with. Call them right now, they can come meet you, they can start talking to you about whatever it is you might want, and we can start getting that work done. So that's something you'd be interested in. There's not too many people that when you say, hey, we can offer you help with whatever you want. Like, I'm not directing what it is. I'm not saying, do you want treatment? I'm not saying what it is you might want. People say yes. Now we get a case manager involved. Now you're in the lead. So another avenue into lead. And then most recently, after George Floyd was murdered, we've always had close ties with our communities when it comes to lead. Lead's not owned by anybody. Lead is ultimately overseen by a number of agencies within the jurisdiction. And we recognize that we needed to have another referral path in. We needed to recognize that community wanted a say in being able to refer folks in. And police are busy. Like, police have a lot going on. And community wants another avenue to be able to say, like, I don't have to always call the police. So community referral pathway, I talked about let everyone advance with dignity. That is our community referral in. So this is a doorway for, if I own a bodega, I've owned that store for 20 years. I know my community. I have somebody coming in and they're shoplifting every day. I know they have food insecurities. I know they've got issues going on. And me, instead of having to call the police department because I don't want that person arrested, but I also don't want people stealing from my store every day, I can now call lead and say, hey, I've got this individual. They're stealing from my store. They've got some food insecurities. I know they got some issues going on at home. Can you guys take a look and see what's going on with this person? And I can enroll them in lead. And now I have this third way to come into lead. And that's really gonna come into play a lot about how we coordinate things and how we not only get people into lead, but how we work together to remove barriers. So let me talk a little bit about how lead is structured. So I said lead is not owned by any one entity. So we look at lead as a collaborative approach. Lead is the police department, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, the city government, the county government, civil rights agencies, community-based agencies, all those folks together working equally. We call that our policy coordinating group. It's basically the board of directors that come together and have an equal say in how we're operating lead. No one agency oversees lead in a hierarchy, but rather a collaborative approach. And ultimately, they hire a project manager who oversees the day-to-day operations, kind of like an executive director. And they make sure that the policies are in place, the procedures in place. They make sure that the resources that need to come to bear are ultimately there, and they're that governing body. And then more importantly, are the folks that are doing the work on the ground, and we call them the operational work group. So the officers making diversions, those case managers that are working day in and day out with the participants, the prosecutors and public defenders that come to the table, because we're talking about folks that have contact with the system. And John and Peter both talked about people still getting arrested. In lead, you don't get kicked out because you have a criminal record, and you don't get kicked out if you get arrested down the road once you're already in lead, because that happens sometimes. So those line folks come together as what we call the operational work group, and they meet every 2 weeks. And everybody that comes in the lead signs a release of information, and everybody understands that this group is going to talk about how that person's doing. And what happens at that meeting is a case manager comes in and a case manager says, Brendan Cox is on my caseload. So whether I come in from an arrest diversion, a social contact referral from a police officer being proactive, or the bodega store owner calling the lead project manager and saying, hey, I got this guy coming in. creating problems in my store. Can you see if you guys can help out? No matter which way I come in, I'm going to come to that meeting, that operational work group meeting. And a case manager is going to say, this is one of my participants. I've been meeting with him. Here's what's going on. And here's what the plan is. And it's really non-coercive. So it's really driven by what that person's ready to do. But the case manager is going to talk about what the pathway forward is. They're also going to talk about what the barriers that may be that they're running into. So whether it's a barrier for a resource or if it's a barrier for where that person's at in the system. So if it's a resource, the group's going to talk through what resources are available in the community, how they can get access to them, whether or not they're available, and how they're going to work through that. Whether or not it's the case manager getting access to that person, like maybe, hey, I can't find this person anymore. And it might be the police being able to say like, yep, they're not at 2nd and Judson anymore because that's become a hot spot. We're having a bunch of shootings there. And their officer might be like, I see that person now at 3rd and Quailmore. And the case manager's like, okay, I'll find them there, because the folks we deal with sometimes are transient. Sometimes they're, of course, forced to different places based on what's happening on the street. And then, of course, we have the fact that prosecutors and public defenders are like, yep, that person has 5 old cases. And we get to make sure that the criminal legal system doesn't get in the way of progress. So if I'm a participant and I'm about to get housing, I'm about to get into a methadone program, I'm about to get back in touch with my family, but there's an old case that's still sitting there that a prosecutor might be looking to move forward on. Now the case manager is able to say to a prosecutor, hey, Brendan's been meeting with me every day. Like, yeah, he's still got a lot of issues going on, but we're meeting and he's about to get a housing voucher and he's talking about getting into methadone and we're making progress. So if we're going to get that and the housing voucher is about to come up, if you're going to move that old case forward and you're going to put him in county jail for 90 days, if that housing voucher comes up while he's in county jail, the voucher is going to go away and it's going to go to the next person in line. And that means he's going to lose out on housing. And we all know that if somebody is not housed, they're going to have a whole different barrier in their way while they're out on the street. And they may wind up still involved in problematic behavior. So why don't we get him housed rather than send him to the county jail for 90 days? And see how that goes rather than deal with the case the way you want to deal with it. So we make decisions at that table to remove barriers to keep that person's positive movement forward going. We also agree that we won't make negative decisions based on somebody's non-engagement. So we might make regular everyday decisions. So a prosecutor might be like, oh, Brendan's not engaged at all. Okay, I'm just going to move my case along and I'm going to do what I need to do. But what they won't do is say, I was going to give him 90 days. Now I know he's not engaged and I'm going to give him 120 days. So we don't make it negative, but we can still go ahead and move our jobs along like we would normally because natural consequences might still fall. So that operation work group really comes into play to remove barriers, to recognize that natural consequences might play, but also to really have that shared understanding of what somebody's going through. It also, for me, like as a former police chief, it was really important for me to have my officers sometimes hear the struggles that individuals went through. Like I have no problem admitting that early in my career, as a young person, I lost empathy for a little bit because all of a sudden I was seeing negative things, negative all the time. And not always understanding what was happening behind the scenes for somebody. Not always understanding that I had one little view of the world from my own upbringing. I had one little view of the world from my family. And I didn't always understand what other people had gone through. Now, when I sit down as a young officer at that work group meeting and I hear about other people's struggles, I hear about what somebody else went through, I realize that like, wow, if I had gone through that, I might be way worse off than what this person is. I all of a sudden hear the resiliency of the individual that we're trying to work with. I understand the struggles, the barriers that are in this person's view. I understand, and I'll only speak to what something like methadone is like in New York, where if I had to go to a clinic 6 times a week to get my medication, I probably would go to the drug dealer too, that's right around the corner from me, rather than have to drive 30 miles to go to the clinic 6 days a week and get a double dose on Saturday. Because that's just simple the fact, as I have to go cancel my yearly physical for Friday as I double book myself. So we all realize the struggles that people go through. So that really helps build that empathy. So I'm going to quickly go through this. So we're field-based, trauma-informed. We don't put a time down on people. People stay with us for as long as they need to. Relationship-based, stages of change, harm reduction, motivational interviewing, really realizing how people change when they're ready to. We're there to get them changed. We also recognize the harm done to the community, so we want to make sure we address that harm as well. We really look to change not only the individual, but that systems change. We want to provide a framework for information sharing and care coordination. Recognize that scarce legal system resources, scarce police resources, and give those folks the proper resources. So give that police officer, that case manager, to be able to say, here's your resource. You no longer have to be the person that has to deal with this situation. Here is your tool. Here is your person you can deal with. We also know we're not the response for everything, and we know we're not the only people out there. We have to collaborate with other folks. So we work with everybody else. So treatment courts, co-responder initiatives, CIT, alternative police response, overdose response, post-arrest diversion. Many times we are coordinating with all those folks because we sometimes have crossover. And sometimes those folks will refer people to us. We've had judges in drug treatment courts refer people to LEAD. We've had participants in LEAD be in drug court. We've had alternative police response folks refer people to LEAD. John, you were talking about some of the responses you guys have. We've had people in co-responder refer people to LEAD because of the long-term care. We've had times at the operation work group meetings that people have been like, hey, this isn't a good LEAD participant. Let's refer this person to a different initiative, realizing that there is no one fit for everybody. And then, this is about this complex problem, multi-partner commitment, multi-agency collective impact. Like, we need people involved. We don't take over for other service providers. So many times we come into a community and service providers are like, well, we already have these services. Our case managers are building a relationship, and they're helping connect people to those services that are available. We're not looking to take over service provisions. Those are needed, much needed. We're looking to get people connected to those. So there's been a lot of evaluations. This is from some of the initial evaluations, but that 58% reduction in recidivism, decrease in felonies, increase in housing, increase in legitimate income, things that are really important. And then we just want to make sure, like, we know, like, this is like not less, this is more. Like, many times it's like, well, what is this? Like, don't we have to divert to something? It's like, yes, we're diverting to this person, to this relationship. No one should ever be worse off. This is a collaborative approach too, so no one loses their own autonomy or authority. All the partners still have the ability to do the job they need to do. So, like, for police, like, if somebody is being so problematic in the community that they do need to be arrested for certain behavior, they still get arrested for that behavior, even if they're a LEAD participant. We just don't kick them out of LEAD. We can still provide them those services, even though, if somebody's shoplifting over and over again, we recognize that store owner might be like, enough is enough. I want to press charges. The police need to do that, but we can still have them as a LEAD participant. Mm-hmm. And I will end there so we can continue our conversation.
This is just so awesome what is being done, the changes and the involvement and the wraparound services that are happening across Toronto, Peel, and in the United States. We want to see more of that. I'm checking and I don't see anyone asking questions, so I will have a few, and Mary's way behind the scenes there. Maybe she has a few questions. But the question I want to ask of all three of our panelists today, what kind of support do you get in your work? Because you have to liaise with so many different individuals and other organizations. What kind of support do you get? Mental health support, HR support, what kind of support? And then I will ask, how do we get this message to the man on the street, the person in the grocery store? How do we get that out? Because people are seeing everything should be done by the police. So how do you get support in what you're doing? And how do you relay that locally to the community? Anyone, please lead the way. Don't all speak at once.
Maybe I
All
could.
right. Sorry. Please, John, go ahead. This is a Canadian standoff we're having right here. No, you go ahead. Okay, I'll be very quick. So I think the work in terms of informing our partners and the community at large is well underway. We sit, I think John spoke about the situation tables. We have a number of focus tables, which is furthering our communities by uniting services, partnerships that are right across the city. And so local service providers meet regularly. And right now, Toronto Police brings about 80% of all the cases because we're more actively engaged in the community there. And so we see all the unmet needs that are there, and we try to connect people with services. So that is getting out, and so that started in 2013, and to date it's over 5,000 individual cases we've brought, affecting just over 8,000 people in communities. And so what we've seen is about an 80% reduction in the next call for service as a result of that. So these things, these services, these local service providers are really having an impact on our demand, and it's furthering our legitimacy in communities, and people are actually speaking to our officers, in particular our neighborhood officers. And so we've now dedicated specialized officers in many of our neighborhoods, and something we want to expand, where we don't take them out of that neighborhood for any reason whatsoever. And so they're not tied to the radio, and they're long-term problem solvers. So by having those officers embedded in communities and being seen as a conduit by which they can access other people can access other services, it's really providing a great deal of help to the community and notice to the community that these programs exist, and that we are not necessarily the people you call. Don't call 911, but you can call our neighborhood officers in order to access these services. And often our officers are accompanying people who have transportation issues, and they have childcare issues and other issues. So there's a number of different ways that we are connecting with the community and getting the message out. John?
Thanks for that, Peter. Completely agree with everything you said. Maybe just to top up on a couple of points. So we launched our divisional mobilization unit, which might be something similar to the neighborhood officers you're referring to, where they're not tied to the call board. They have the autonomy to work with partners in a way and work with our communities in a way that's organic, in a way that is based on the issues at hand. So a lot of the way and the support that we've been building in the community has been very organic. And I think in order to build those trusting relationships with partners, it can't happen in an artificial context. It's happening in real time. It's happening based on real live cases. And I think, over time, that trust has continued to grow. And, our partners have been absolutely phenomenal here in Peel. We have 50 partners at our situation table. We're partnered up with the Safe Center. We're partnered in a number of smaller initiatives as well. So that has really been the key ingredient to everything that we've been doing. I think we can probably do a better job getting the word out about all of this. A lot of these changes happened during a time of COVID, so it took a little bit of time for them to take root. You can imagine a unit that's focused on engagement, and we're now in a situation where there's a lockdown. So it's starting to ramp up, and I think the next phase is how do we continue to get that word out so everyone knows the supports and resources we have to offer, and that the community knows that we've taken this approach to policing. To your first question around, the supports in terms of the work that our officers are doing, our chief often talks about if you want to be good on the outside, you need to be good on the inside. So that's a message that we hear every day right from the top of our organization. And I think, individuals feel supported when they hear that. And that just attaches, the engagement and the investment and the buy-in to everything that's happening here. So I'll stop there and pass it over to Brendan.
Yeah, I agree with everything from Peter and John. I would just add, one of the components for community engagement, we try to really have a community arm of LEAD. So that way we have folks with lived experience. We have folks from the neighborhoods that are able to really engage and educate around LEAD. So that way there's really boots on the ground. We really like to do that. And then, one of the things we've tried to build with LEAD is, my agency are the folks that do the technical assistance and support. That way, folks that want to engage in LEAD, jurisdictions that want that, have the support mechanism in place. So when they have a question, they have a place to call. When they need a policy, when they need training, they have somebody in. And then we try to build a network. So that way, anyone that's doing LEAD can be connected to that bigger network and learn from each other. To me, there's no reason to hide information. Let's all share information. Let's all make sure we all have what everyone's doing. We can all learn from each other. That's what we're supposed to be doing. This is supposed to be about collaboration. So let's make sure we're all collaborating with each other. I'm not sure I've ever had an original idea. So I've probably gotten things from everybody else all along the way. So.
Thank you. One of the questions we have from a participant today, Sabrina, and perhaps each of you could please comment, maybe she just needs a few concrete things, because you have already explained the community liaison officer and what they offer, like boots on the ground knowledge of the community. But she's asking for you to comment on the benefits of working collaboratively with the community liaison officer. What do they offer? Go ahead, anyone, please.
Can I'll start then. So I think it's important, and one of the things that we don't do so well, police agencies that is explain the different roles and responsibilities of each officer. And so neighborhood officers, as we like to call them, new neighborhood community officers that are embedded in communities, we take a lot of things off their plate, but there's a big structure that goes in behind to support that officer so that they can be as effective as is possible. But, we ask our officers to do emergency response. Those are transactional cops, as I like to say. They're there to deal with the immediate emergency that they've been called for. And, just the facts, let's sort this out, because, they're driven by the demands that are there. And so it's not unusual for 30 calls to be waiting. And those are 30 people who require help. And so, these are complex issues that we're dealing with. And so what we've really truly done with the neighborhood officers is created a capacity for them to have the time to respond. And so I think it's important, because people, when they call 911, may believe that they're getting one kind of cop and really they're getting another cop. And so that emergency officer may and will connect with the neighborhood cop, who can spend more time and come in the days and maybe hours that follow. And sometimes they co-respond in some cases. But as you can imagine, those officers in our cars answering emergency calls simply do not have the time to sort through many of the complexities of issues. And what they do is they're great at passing the information along to the officers and the other checks and balances we have organizationally that allow them to get that person help down the road. And it doesn't look the same, but the outcomes are very, very similar. And so when you ask about our community liaison officers, everyone's a community liaison officer in today's policing. The reality is that our officers are all in Toronto, that is, given cell phones that are all they're all connected officers, and so all the resources and services that they might require, all the different rules and procedures, that the guidance that is provided when things are changing are there. They have at their fingertips the ability to call and connect with partners in real time, and that's what we ask them to do in order to prevent those calls for service from happening again. It's a great question, and I think the value of officers embedded in communities. I mean, I don't know how you could overstate it. It's why I joined. I joined to help people, as most police officers do. And when I've had the time to really connect with people and to really drive through issues and to get to the root of what the problems actually are, the best outcomes are the result. And so we're trying to create that time for officers to do that. And we're hoping to shift what response actually looks like and who should be doing response. For instance, right now we have the Gerstein Center, who's embedded in our communications bureau, who is taking emergency 911 calls that come in that have a crisis component to it. So if people agree, they'll dispatch crisis workers, not police officers, to calls like that. So this is how we can create capacity for our officers to really be the conduit in neighborhoods.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Brendan or John? Boots on the ground, what do they offer?
I'll just go really quickly because I think we could just tape record everything Peter said and play it again because it's a fantastic response. The only thing I'll add, and I think one of the benefits of, again, we call them divisional mobilization unit officers here in Peel Regional Police. So they do have that flexibility. They're not jumping from call to call. They can take the time to understand what the root issue is. And it takes a long time to build trust. And frontline officers, when you're jumping from call to call to call, don't have the time to sit down, loop back, check in to see how someone's doing. And we've had, examples where our DMU officers have, in one situation, been engaged with someone 40 times. It takes a lot of time to build that trust, to get someone to take those services, and it needs to be a repeat effort, and frontline just doesn't have the capacity to do that by the nature of their role. So I think building trust is a key piece. And I think the other piece is that for us, those mobilization officers fill that nexus or that gap between identifying what the issue is and actually connecting them to a service that can benefit them. As you can imagine, frontline officer attends a call, they've got one on the board, they might have time to say, hey, here's a resource you might want to consider. But if we can have someone that can actually sit down in their living room, build the trust, take that time and navigate them to the appropriate supports, we're using the system more effectively, we're getting people the help we need, and it benefits everyone. And I could give a number of examples, but one that stood out to me in particular was a young individual who our DMU officers and community partners were successful in supporting them to agree to go to treatment. And in some cases, you need to be sober for a certain period of time before they'll accept you. And our DMU officers were with that individual, were there 3, 4, 5 times, checking in, making sure they have what they need to support them through that process. So, that's just one example of a number of immeasurable examples, but it's really having that time and space to do things differently, to look outside the box, because we need our frontline officers responding to the calls that need them the most. And this has given a space for us to do things differently, not to take over that role, but to connect people to where they need to be connected.
Thank you. Do you have any additional information for us, Brendan?
I think Peter and John covered it all.
Thank you. Well, we're getting almost to the end of our session today. And what I'm taking away is that there are experts in our police services across board. They're doing many dynamic things to change the way we work in the justice system. We have all agreed that being incarcerated does not lead to good outcomes, especially for folks who have addictions and those who are homeless. Of course, individuals that have done terrific crimes, they need to be incarcerated and go through the process. But I'm sitting here as someone in the community, and what I'm hearing is that some judges do not want to do that. So if you were to leave us with one tip for a judge today in the court, because I've been in the court where I sat as an observer, where an 18-year-old was just tremoring away. He did not complete his community work. He has addiction. He was not in treatment. And what the judge says, you will be going right back to jail unless you do your probation. So what is some kind, positive words that each of you could take 2 minutes, if you need that time, to say to our judges so that they become, and some are, not all, collaboratives and partnership with us so that we move ahead through the system? What would you say?
I would say open yourself up and talk to other experts. Listen to the public health folks. Listen to what other people have to say. That we don't always know the right way. And if we don't listen to other experts in other fields, we're never going to actually get to true public safety.
Yes. Peter, John?
I would just say that everyone has a story, and I don't think people truly appreciate what others go through. Brendan talked about losing a little bit of empathy there, and I think that happens not just to police officers but to everyone. And I went through a stage where you know, I relate to what John said, or sorry, to what Brendan said there. But you have to find that again, and you have to realize that we're dealing with human beings who they themselves don't want to be in this predicament. And I would say that you know, we have to find the goodness in our heart to offer people a pathway out, because the reality is no one goes to jail forever, and all you're doing is diverting a problem and creating a bigger one down the road. And so from that perspective, I think that we could all learn.
Thank you. Final word, John, you have the final word.
Okay, I don't get that too often, so I'll try to make the best use of it. To your point, Peter, about looking at the long-term outcome down the road, I really like that, and I think I would just build on that by saying, and also building up what you were talking about earlier, Brendan. And I love the idea that you have justices right around the table. And, you know, we often talk about, you know, systems integration, you know, service integration, service coordination, but to have judges and justices involved in that process, I would say, you know, maybe not a piece of advice, but maybe an opportunity for how we can integrate our judges in more of the work that we're doing. So we see all sides of it, and we can all have that. You know, Charmaine Devine, when she was giving her final remarks just before we came on, talked about that collective approach. Getting our judges involved in that so we can all see the same outcome and be rowing in the same direction. I think that's that would be my final thought.
We have come to the end of our session, and I am so very thankful and so very humble for what you've shared today. All this information has been recorded, and I'm hoping that especially our community that does not have the insight of what is happening, the changes, because sometimes you can hear a lot of negativity from one situation that may have gone really downside and not upright. So I'm so excited to hear about the partnerships, the collaboration, the outreach that is now being done through our police services. And it's not that it hadn't been done before, it is now different partners enhancing, bringing together new initiatives, looking at how we work with, especially people that are homeless and have addiction, It is so sad at times when some of those folks end up being incarcerated, they really come out of that being worse. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of our conference planners today for joining us for this length of time. And I thank you so very much. Have a great afternoon.